Alright, here's the Paul Warburg chart. His family and other associations. Alright. Federal Reserve System. The secrecy was well warranted. At stake was control over the entire economy. Senator Aldrich had issued confidential invitations to Henry P. Davison of J.P. Morgan and Company, Frank A. Vanderlip, president of Rockefeller-owned National City Bank, A. Pyatt Andrew, assistant secretary of the Treasury, Benjamin Strong of Morgan's Bankers Trust and Company, and Paul Warburg. They were all to accompany him to Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island, Georgia, to write the final recommendations of the National Monetary Commission report. At Jekyll Island, writes B.C. Forbes in his Men Who Are Making America, after a general discussion, it was decided to draw up certain broad principles on which we could all agree. Every member of the group voted for a central bank as being the ideal cornerstone of any banking system. Warburg stressed that the name central bank must be avoided at all costs. It was decided to promote the scheme as a regional reserve system with 4, later 12 branches in different sections of the country. The conspirators knew that the New York Bank would dominate the rest, which would be marble white elephants to deceive the public. Out of the Jekyll Island meeting came the completion of the Monetary Commission report and the Aldrich Bill. Warburg had proposed the bill he designated the Federal Reserve System, but Aldrich insisted his own name was already associated in the public's mind with banking reform, and that it would arouse suspicion if a bill were introduced which did not bear his name. However, Aldrich's name attached to the bill proved to be the kiss of death, since any law bearing his name was so obviously a project of the international bankers. When the Aldrich Bill could not be pushed through Congress, a new strategy had to be devised. The Republican Party was too closely connected with Wall Street. The only hope for a central bank was to disguise it and have it put through by the Democrats as a measure to strip Wall Street of its power. The opportunity to do this came with the approach of the 1912 presidential election. Republican President William Howard Taft, who had turned against the Aldrich Bill, seemed a surefire bet for re-election, until Taft's predecessor, fellow Republican Teddy Roosevelt, agreed to run on the ticket of the Progressive Party in America's In America's 60 families, Ferdinand Lundberg acknowledges, as soon as Roosevelt signified that he would again challenge Taft, the president's defeat was inevitable. Throughout the three-cornered fight, Taft, Roosevelt, Wilson, Roosevelt had Morgan agents Frank Muncie and George Perkins constantly at his heels, supplying money, going over his speeches, bringing people from Wall Street in to help, and in general, carrying the entire burden of the campaign against Taft. Perkins and J.P. Morgan and Company were the substance of the Progressive Party. Everything else was trimming. In short, most of Roosevelt's campaign fund was supplied by the two Morgan hatchet men who were seeking Taft's scalp. The Democratic candidate, Woodrow Wilson, was equally the property of Morgan. Dr. Gabriel Kolko, in his The Triumph of Conservatism, reports, in late 1907, Wilson supported the Aldrich Bill on banking and was full of praise for Morgan's role in American society. According to Lundberg, for nearly 20 years before his nomination, Woodrow Wilson had moved in the shadow of Wall Street. Woodrow Wilson and Teddy Roosevelt proceeded to whistle-stop the country, trying to outdo each other in florid and hypocritical denunciations of the Wall Street Money Trust, the same group of insiders which was financing both campaigns. Dr. Kolko goes on to tell us that at the beginning of 1912, banking reform seemed a dead issue. The banking reform movement had neatly isolated itself. Wilson resurrected the issue and promised the country a money system free of domination by the international bankers of Wall Street. Moreover, the Democratic platform expressly stated, "We are opposed to the Aldrich plan for a central bank," but the big boys knew who they had bought. Among the international financiers who contributed heavily to the Wilson campaign, in addition to those already named, were Jacob Schiff, Bernard Baruch, Henry Morgenthau, Thomas Fortune Ryan, and New York Times publisher Adolph Ochs. The insider sheepdog who controlled Wilson and guided the program through Congress was the mysterious Colonel Edward Mandell House, the British-educated son of a representative of English financing interests in the American South. The title was honorary. House never served in the military. He was strictly a behind-the-scenes wire puller and is regarded by many historians as the real president of the United States during the Wilson years. House authored a book, Philip Drew, Administrator, in which he wrote of establishing socialism as dreamed by Karl Marx. As step towards his goal, House, both in his book and in real life, called for passage of a graduated income tax and a central bank providing a flexible, inflatable paper currency. The graduated income tax and central bank are two of the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. In his The Intimate Papers of Colonel House, Professor Charles Seymour refers to the Colonel as the unseen guardian angel of the Federal Reserve Act. Seymour's work contains numerous documents and records showing constant contact between House and Paul Warburg while the Federal Reserve Act was being prepared and steered through Congress. Biographer George Vyrick assures us that the Schiffs, the Warburgs, the Kahns, the Rockefellers, and the Morgans put their faith in House. Their faith was amply rewarded. In order to support the fiction that the Federal Reserve Act was a people's bill, the insider financiers put up a smokescreen of opposition to it. It was strictly a case of Brer Rabbit begging not to be thrown into the briar patch. Both Aldrich and Vanderlip denounced what, in actuality, was their own bill. Nearly 25 years later, Frank Vanderlip admitted, "Now, although the Aldrich Federal Reserve Plan was defeated when it bore the name Aldrich, nevertheless, its essential points were all contained in the plan that was finally adopted." Taking advantage of Congress' desire to adjourn for Christmas, the Federal Reserve Act was passed on December 22, 1913, by a vote of 298 to 60 in the House and in the Senate by a majority of 43 to 25. Wilson had fulfilled to the insiders the pledge he had made in order to become president. Warburg told House, "Well, it hasn't got quite everything we want. The lack can be adjusted later by administrative process." There was genuine opposition to the act, but it could not match the power of the bill's advocates. Conservative Henry Cabot Lodge Sr. proclaimed with great foresight, "The bill as it stands seems to me an open way to a vast inflation of currency. I do not like to think that any law can be passed which will make it possible to submerge the gold standard in a flood of irredeemable paper currency." Congressional Record, June 10, 1932. After the vote, Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh Sr., father of the famous aviator, told Congress, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President signs this act, the invisible government by the money power proven to exist by the money trust investigation will be legalized. This is the Aldrich Bill in disguise. The new law will create inflation whenever the trusts want inflation." The Federal Reserve Act was and still is hailed as a victory of democracy over the money trust. Nothing could be further from the truth. The whole central bank concept was engineered by the very group it was supposed to strip of power. The myth that the money trust had been defrocked should have been exploded when Paul Warburg was appointed to the first Federal Reserve Board, a board which was handpicked by Colonel House. Paul Warburg relinquished his $500,000 a year job as Kuhn Loeb partner to take a $12,000 a year job with the Federal Reserve. The accidentalists who teach in our universities would have you believe that he did it because he was a public-spirited citizen. And the man who served as chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank during its early critical years was the same Benjamin Strong of the Morgan interests who accompanied Warburg, Davison, Vanderlip to Jekyll Island, Georgia, to draft the Aldrich Bill. How powerful is our central bank? The Federal Reserve controls our money supply and interest rates and thereby manipulates the entire economy, creating inflation or deflation, recession or boom, and sending the stock market up or down at a whim. The Federal Reserve is so powerful that Congressman Wright Patman, chairman of the House Banking Committee, maintains, in the United States today we have in effect two governments. We have the duly constituted government, and then we have an independent, uncontrolled, and uncoordinated government in the Federal Reserve System, operating the money powers which are reserved to Congress by the Constitution. Neither presidents, congressmen, nor secretaries of the Treasury direct the Federal Reserve. In the matters of money, the Federal Reserve directs them. The uncontrolled power of the Fed was admitted by Secretary of Treasury David M. Kennedy in an interview for the May 5, 1969 issue of U.S. News and World Report. Question: do you approve of the latest credit tightening moves? Answer: it's not my job to approve or disapprove. It isn't the action of the Federal Reserve. And curiously enough, the Federal Reserve System has never been audited and has firmly resisted all attempts by the House Banking Committee Chairman Wright Patman to have it audited. And they've been trying to audit ever since then. It's 2012. And Ron Paul's still trying to audit the Federal Reserve. They won't let him. And that's it. He just wants the records.
Are you serious?
Yeah. But all they want to do is see the records of where all the money.
He's really like.
Yeah, that's his big issue. But it'll never happen. They've got so much power. They own too many of the politicians. So anything that happens, it's got to be a majority vote. They own the majority, and they have for a long time. But there are a few honest ones out there, like Ron Paul, who has been like a soldier for a long, long time, trying to wake people up to this and trying to get this bill passed. Because if we could really restructure things if we were able to audit them, because we would see how corrupt everything's been, and it would lead to a complete real reform and go back to a gold standard.
Why? I just don't see why people don't make a big deal. If he asks for it and they're doing the right thing, why shouldn't they just be like, oh, okay, here it is?
No, they'll tell him to his face, Ron, we trust the Federal Reserve. So if you try to pass a bill that gets it to audit it, we will vote against that bill. We trust the Federal Reserve because their Federal Reserve owns them. So that's what's up.
Still, with the politicians trusting them, I don't see how that would make a difference if they showed that.
Well, that's a good place.
Sorry.
Well, what good distance if they showed what?
Dude, that's just so shitty. Like, that still has nothing to do with them not showing
the public is definitely not smart enough, and politicians that are smart enough, once they get to a place where their opinion matters, they're owned by that time. It's standard operating procedure. Everyone knows that the Federal Reserve loans valueless money to America, and then America pays that money back in interest. Everybody knows this. It's undeniable. But the politicians will just lie to your face and tell you it's not happening, and they trust the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank. It's called the Federal Reserve. It's a private bank. You think you could go open the federal anything? The federal.
They'd probably get shot if they got on their property or something like that.
The federal pizza. Federal pizzas and burgers. No, because federal's associated with government. So that's what's up. Federal Reserve came into existence 1913.